It all started as a whisper in the wind, a secret that began like a slow trickle and went undetectable until it flooded everyone unable to control. 20-year-old college student Amir never thought his life would cross with someone like Lydia. He had limited means and great aspirations, rich, elegant, and untouchable. She was everything his world lacked. Lydia was running her worldwide tech company in her mid-40s, married to a man as far apart as the stars, and spent her time experimenting in charities and costly interests. Nobody thought she harbored any more intense ambitions. Amir and Lydia met in the most unusual of locations, a high-end boutique where he worked part-time helping affluent clients. Lydia visited often, and one calm afternoon their talk turned from fabrics and designs to something more personal. The appeal of youth satisfied the need for excitement. Before either could understand what was happening, their relationship developed into something illegal and strong. Friends, sorry to interrupt, but please help me reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. Let's keep going. Still, secrets have a way of breaking through even with the best of protection. When Lydia's husband, Lars, started to see unusual changes in her behavior, her well-crafted life was about to collapse. Though Lydia had always been understated, Lars was no fool. Her late-night visits, her inexplicable absences, and the secrecy around her phone made him wary. He hired a private investigator to follow her movements, rather than the kind to approach her straightforwardly. The investigator soon sent a sequence of damning pictures, Lydia meeting Amir in locations far too close to be innocent. Though Lars was simmering under the surface, he played the waiting game. Before he moved, he wanted more information. Lydia and Amir's affair got more intense meanwhile. Lydia lavished him with costly presents, giving Amir a taste of a life he could never afford on his own. She wanted in return more, though. The more she gave, the excitement of secrecy soon was insufficient for her. As if they could live free once her marriage was over, she began talking about leaving Lars and creating a future with Amir. Amir grew uneasy, even though the gifts and attention delighted him. He had not registered for this degree of dedication. Unannounced one evening, Lydia showed up at Amir's little apartment, her eyes wild with desperation. Lars had earlier challenged her, seeking responses. Though his words clearly indicated he knew something, he hadn't shown her the pictures. Lydia terrified her. She persuaded herself that leaving Lars before he destroyed her was her only way out. But Amir wasn't ready to face that storm. Lydia snapped when he tried to distance himself from her and slow down things. Her eyes looked from terror to something darker. Days went by, and Amir became quiet. Not heard from him were his friends, colleagues, even his mother. They first thought he was simply busy or on a trip, but questions developed when he missed work for an entire week. Authorities were contacted to look into it only when one of his neighbors claimed an unusual odor emanating from his apartment. Inside, they discovered Amir's body, dead and frigid, his face bruised, and his neck clearly show evidence of strangulation. Amir's death had been violent, personal, even if the crime scene was a disorganized mix of broken furniture and blood-stained walls. Lydia's name soon came to light as the police launched a fast inquiry. Friends of Amir's mentioned a wealthy older woman who had been seen with him regularly in the months preceding his death. The last number Lydia's phone records revealed Amir had called was, she was brought in under interrogation. Her cool head was breaking under suspicion. Lydia said Amir had been alive the last time she saw him, but her account conflicted. To untangle the truth behind Amir's horrific murder, authorities turned to forensic science. They brought in cadaver dogs, taught to identify decomposing bodies, and search and rescue teams. Investigating the location of Lydia's country estate, 2 dogs found something eerie. Traces of Amir's blood on fast-washed but still microscopic evidence-carrying clothes. Starting to fit together, Lydia's well-crafted lies started to fall apart under the weight of the data. Still, there were unresolved issues even as the study went forward. Why had Lydia killed Amir? Was it a flash of passion gone bad? Or had she always intended to quiet him once her affair came to light? Though they were unsure yet, the researchers knew one thing for sure. Lydia's story revealed far more than first appeared. Lydia's story grew more complicated the deeper one dug. Originally appearing as a desperate crime of passion, what had first seemed like soon turned into something far darker. Lydia had been spiraling out of control long before Amir's murder, as detectives sipped over her phone logs, financial records, and the odd web of lies she had spun. For years, Lydia had been living two lives, one that even her closest friends had not known about. The extravagant dinners and high societal charitable events were only a front, a diversion from the reality that her marriage had long ago become frigid. Lars had always been emotionally absent, even if he was financially successful. Behind the closed doors of their great estate, what seemed to be a perfect life was hollow and brittle. Lydia had become bored, resentful, most importantly hungry for affection. But it was control, not only affection she yearned for. She had other affairs besides with Amir. Over the past few years, investigators found a series of younger men she had been involved with, all of whom had gotten lavish attention and similar expensive presents. Still, Amir was unique. He was not merely another flinger for her. Lydia had fallen completely fixated on, from pricey watches to a designer motorcycle. She lavished him with luxury goods and even made hints about putting his name on a piece of real estate. In many respects, Amir found it all too good to be true. When questioned by the police, Amir's friends presented a picture of a young man who had become progressively uncomfortable in the months before his death. Lydia was becoming erratic, demanding more of his time and pushing him toward a future he didn't want. He had told a close friend, Reem. Amir had gently and nervously told Reem over coffee one afternoon about leaving her husband for me. I registered for nothing like this. Police investigating Amir's personal life discovered no evidence of unstable behavior or dangerous activity on his side. Amir had been a decent student, hoping to launch his own company someday and saving his part-time job income for his future. Although close, his relationship with Lydia was not something he had ever dreamed would turn violent. Though Lydia wouldn't let him go, he had tried to distance things. Recoverable from digital forensics, text messages from Lydia revealed her mounting desperation in the days before her death. She sent long, erratic messages at odd hours, alternately between claims of betrayal and professions of love. Lydia clearly had lost her control. Just days before Amir's body was found, her husband Lars told police he had confronted her about the affair. The cold and shrewd businessman Lars had first wanted the truth, not to destroy Lydia. He said he followed her and observed her behavior. She would leave the house for hours without explanation, suddenly became more secretive with her phone, and her browser history was routinely deleted. Lydia had started crying when Lars had finally faced her, confessing the affair but swearing it was over. He was unaware, meanwhile, that Lydia had left Amir's apartment that very same evening, just hours before the murder took place. A surveillance camera outside Amir's apartment provided the last piece of proof, tightening Lydia's neck around. The video showed Lydia late at night, walking into the building, her face covered by a big cap and sunglasses. But clearly, Lydia. She stayed for somewhat less than 1 hour. She then went back to her car and threw a blood-stained piece of clothing into a nearby dumpster, a mistake that would later provide detectives the DNA evidence they required to charge her, so securing her fate. Lydia's lawyer, a slick defense attorney known for getting wealthy clients out of apparently difficult circumstances, argued Lydia had acted in self-defense as the inquiry turned toward trial. Amir had become enraged when she tried to split off their relationship, he said, and in a flash of panic she had fought him off, causing his unintentional death. The physical evidence, however, presented another picture. Amir's defensive wounds on his arms, the bruises on his neck, and the total lack of injuries on Lydia suggested she had been the aggressor. Forensics verified that Amir had been strangled with a scarf Lydia owned, one with DNA traces, both of which Amir carried. Detectives came across Lydia's search history from the night before the murder, in a particularly horrible moment during the inquiry. She had gone ogled how to break up a younger man, followed by searches for how to cover up a crime scene. Not the work of someone defending herself. It was planned, and the prosecution was ready to make that abundantly evident in court. Still, the trial would not be a straightforward matter-of-fact presentation. Lydia's riches and power let her spin a story of victimhood, a woman caught in an abusive marriage, who had sought comfort in a younger man, only to find herself in an impossible situation. The media devoured it, depicting her as the sad figure of a lonely wife who had only made a terrible mistake. Still, behind the headlines, the data was unambiguous. Lydia was the main suspect since Amir had been dead. The world watched as the trial date loomed to see whether justice would be done, or if Lydia's riches and charm would let her flee the results of her deeds. But whispers of more secrets hiding in Lydia's past, secrets that might completely destroy her defense, resurfaced even as the trial got underway. Lydia's trial was almost like a show. Every seat in the courtroom was occupied by reporters, inquisitive onlookers, and people attracted by the tragedy and scandal. Lydia had been presented in the media as either the calculating, manipulative woman able of murder or the desperate, mistreated wife. But as the trial progressed, one piece of damning evidence at a time, the truth started to surface. Beginning with forensic evidence, the prosecution presented a terrifying story of Amir's last hours. Amir had not died quickly, according to the autopsy report and expert testimony, which presented a bleak picture. He had battled, probably realizing too late that the woman he had once relied on was now working to kill him. Though the evidence was clear, he had been overwhelmed. His defensive wounds revealed a desperate attempt to protect himself. Traces of Lydia's skin were under Amir's fingernails, indicating the struggle that had followed. Her fingerprints were discovered on the scarf used to strangle him. But Lydia was condemned not only by physical evidence, but also by intellectual ones. Examining her online search history, the prosecution dug at a crucial piece of the puzzle, showing Lydia had been organizing the murder. It was difficult to justify the searches for how to break off a relationship with a younger man or handle evidence as coincidences. Alina, the sharp, austere lead prosecutor, shredded the defense's assertions that Lydia had acted in self-defense. This was not a passion crime. Alina told the jury this was not a desperate woman battling for her life. This was a meticulously thought-out act of violence, carried out by someone accustomed to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. Lydia sat stone-faced much of the trial, but the fissures in her facade started to show. Her once perfect calm wavered when Amir's mother, an old woman with a soft voice and a broken heart, stood forward. Her son was a nice, industrious young man with aspirations of a future Lydia had taken away. She told the courtroom the last time she had seen Amir alive, how he had appeared disturbed but reluctant to disclose the cause of his suffering. The courtroom was still. She talked of her unanswered phone calls and the terrible moment when police knocked on her door to inform her that her son had been discovered dead. Tears welled in her eyes. The defense sought to change the story, presenting Lydia as the actual victim, a woman caught in a loveless marriage who had been taken advantage of by a younger man. Amir, they said, had become possessive and aggressive when Lydia tried to call off things. Lydia herself stood up and gave a practiced performance tinged with regret and tears. She told the jury Amir had threatened to expose the affair and tarnish her name, so ruining her. Her voice quivering. "I was terrified," she said, "though I saw no other way out. I didn't want to hurt him." The jury was not persuaded, though. Her story had far too many gaps, too many contradictions inconsistent with the facts. Perhaps the most damaging evidence came from Lydia's husband, Lars. who had been summoned to testify about the condition of their marriage and his awareness of her affair. Not defending Lydia, Lars, cold and deliberate as always. As it happened, Lydia had a history of risky behavior, which stunned the courtroom. Lars acknowledged knowing about past affairs Lydia had engaged in over the years. Knowing what she was capable of, Lars said, "I tolerated it." His eyes stayed on his wife. He related how a young personal trainer, Lydia's former boyfriend, had suddenly left town under unknown circumstances in the past. Though he had suspected Lydia was involved, Lars had decided not to probe too closely. His disclosure created a picture of a woman who had always been straddling a tightrope between charm and craziness, using her riches and power to flee consequences. But Lydia had gone too far here. When the prosecution presented fresh evidence, a secret email account Lydia had been using to contact Amir, the last blow arrived. Read aloud in court, those emails revealed a side of Lydia that no one had seen before. Cold, calculated, and obsessed with controlling every element of her life, including the people in it. Lydia had written about her frustrations, her desires, and, shockingly, her thoughts of harming Amir if he didn't rules in those emails. The defense's claims got weaker as the trial drew to an end. Lydia's attorney sought to discredit the data, but it was too overwhelming. The closing case from the prosecution was straightforward, but strong. Lydia did not merely kill Amir in a flash of panic. She designed it. Like in past times, she felt she could get away with it. But this time we won't let her. The jury debated 3 days, and during that time, the media whirled with conjecture. Some still thought Lydia's account of events was accurate, convinced she had been under younger man's control. Most, though, saw through the front. Lydia's guilt was obviously clear from the evidence. The jury came back on the 3rd day with a guilty on all counts decision. First-degree murder with premeditation and malice aforesaid. Once a picture of grace and control, Lydia collapsed as the result was announced. She looked actually terrified for the first time since the trial started. Lydia was sentenced by the judge in a strict and austere manner to life in prison without any chance of parole. The weight of the choice buzzed about the courtroom. Emotionless, Lars sat in the rear as though the woman he had once been married to no longer counted. Lydia's fall from grace was total. Her luxurious life was replaced by the frigid, hard reality of a jail cell. The world had seen her for what she really was. Now, nothing could save her with money or charm. Though grieved by their loss, Amir's family took some comfort in the knowledge that justice had been done. Tears in her eyes, but also with a quiet sense of peace, his mother left the courtroom clutching a picture of her son every day of the trial. Local history would record Lydia and Amir's narrative as a warning about the perils of obsession, power, and unbridled desire, rather than only as a sad love affair gone terribly wrong. The dust started to settle once Lydia sentenced, and the crime's aftermath affected everyone engaged, even with the decision reached. Once full of cocktail events and high society gatherings, Lydia's glitzy world was in ruins. Once praised for her social contacts and charitable work, the media became savage following the trial. Headlines screamed of the socialite killer, so diminishing Lydia to nothing more than a warning sign. Her life became a tabloid fixation as every dirty detail of her past was made public. Now, the estranged husband of a convicted killer, Lars managed the controversy using the same icy accuracy that had defined his testimony. He filed for divorce without delay, cut all ties to Lydia, and turned away from the mess she had produced. Although some questioned why he had stayed quiet for so long, Lars came out rather unharmed, his business empire whole. His lawyers made sure Lydia's legal problems had no bearing on his riches, and Lars vanished from public view once the trial concluded. Behind the scenes, though, rumors surfaced that Lars had known far more about Lydia's sinister inclinations than he had revealed. Though no proof ever surfaced to support those allegations, some conjectured He had used her as a scapegoat for his own secret transgressions. Like the mystery he had always been, Lars vanished from sight and left the planet to wonder just how far the secrets of his marriage went. Amir's family, meanwhile, battled to move on. Having been there all through the trial, his mother withdrew into a quiet grief. Her loss of a son had left an unfillable hole. Though justice was done in the courtroom, it did not bring Amir back, and his absence tormented his loved ones greatly. Friends and relatives banded around Amir's mother, but the suffering was always with her. Every mark Amir would have attained, graduation, employment, marriage, became a reminder of what had been taken from him. Amir's family opened a scholarship fund in his name in the months following the trial, hoping to give other young people with aspirations of creating something for themselves possibilities. The fund turned into a tiny lighthouse in an otherwise dark chapter, enabling Amir's legacy to live in a way that honored his goals. For Lydia, life in jail was a far cry from the opulent existence she had known. Her cell was little, plain, and merciless. Gone were the fancy dinners, the costly clothing, and the well-chosen impression of wealth and power. She was now simply another prisoner, surrounded by women who had also carried out horrific crimes. Lydia sought to keep the same dignity she had shown in society, but prison had a way of removing all pretense. She was no longer in charge, no more the focus of attention. In the hard reality of the prison system, her attempts to use her charm and contacts to better her circumstances came back flat. Lydia's reputation waned over time, and she became just another name on a long list of executed killers. She had no friends in jail. Her arrogant behavior attracted few fellow prisoners as allies. The public's obsession with Lydia finally faded, although the media would periodically follow her and publish quick updates about her life behind bars. Her once infamous name vanished from the headlines as fresh scandals surfaced. She tried to appeal the decision, but all efforts to have her conviction overturned came back up short. The courts maintained the life sentence without parole, much as the first jury was unmoved by her charms. As the years passed, the judge's comments at sentencing, "You are a danger to those around you, and you will never be free again," repeated in her mind. Her life of privilege had disappeared, and the reality of her new one took front stage. One last turn in the story, though, something that surfaced long after the trial concluded. Authorities found evidence implying Lydia had engaged in dubious behavior outside of her affair with Amir during their look at her finances. Though the specifics remained vague, several sizable unaccounted-for withdrawals from her personal accounts indicated possible bribery and under-the-table sales. Some questioned whether Lydia had been blackmailing Lars or other wealthy friends, funding her way of life from knowledge of their secrets. But these riddles stayed unmet with Lydia behind bars and reluctant to communicate. Eventually, Lydia and Amir's case came to represent how wealth and power might corrupt individuals down paths they never would have considered. Lydia had destroyed a young man's life and, finally, her own, driven by her need for control, her need to be loved and desired. Originally a thrilling escape from her frigid, empty marriage, the affair had turned into violence and catastrophe. An indulgence became an obsession, and that obsession had become lethal. The world carried on, but for those who had followed it closely, the narrative stayed in their minds. It evolved into a sort of contemporary morality story, a warning about the perils of unbridled impulses and the results of leading two lives. Those who had once praised Lydia for her wealth and charm now spoke of her in subdued tones, her name a sobering reminder that even the most ideal lives can conceal the darkest secrets. Regarding Amir's memory, it stayed in the hearts of people who loved him, as well as in the scholarship fund. Though his life had been cut short, his story became a rallying cry for justice, evidence of the fact that the truth can triumph, even in the face of riches and influence. Lydia had taken everything from him, but ultimately she paid the highest cost for her deeds. Far from the life Lydia had known, in a quiet prison cell, she was left to consider the decisions that had brought her down, a complex web of lies and dishonesty. There would not be second chances or escape. Every day, she struggled with the life she had destroyed since the outside world forgot the name Lydia once meant anything at all. Years went by, and public memory of Lydia's once spectacular trial had faded. For most, the narrative had become little more than a fleeting chapter in the never-ending cycle of crises and disasters. For those personally impacted, the families, the friends, Lydia herself, the wounds never completely healed. Now in her 60s, Lydia spent her days in quiet solitude behind prison walls. Her once sharp features had softened, years of stress and solitude sapping her. Long gone was the appeal that had pulled so many into her orbit. She spent her time in the prison library, penning letters never answered, and considering the choices that had guaranteed her death. Though the weight of her actions stayed heavy on her heart, the desperation and conceit that had driven her to kill Amir now felt like far-off memories. Lydia knew there would be no release, no last chance at atonement. Her appeals had run out. She would die in that cell, by herself, with the decisions that had brought her to that point. Though their loss permanently altered Amir's family, years following the trial brought some sort of peace. Watching as many young people fulfilled the dreams Amir never could, his mother kept working with the scholarship fund under his name. Though the loss never totally vanished, it softened and was replaced by a quiet pride in the legacy he left behind. Lydia's story became a ghost of the past, a warning tale murmured in the shadow of high society as the planet progressed. She had tried to regulate everything: her life, her image, and finally Amir's fate. Ultimately, though, it was justice that had last say, and so Lydia's name vanished with time, while Amir's legacy silently blossomed as evidence that hope can still find a path, even in tragedy.